Many animals and even plant species communicate with each other. Humans are not unique in this capacity. However, human language is unique in being a symbolic communication system that is learned instead of biologically inherited. Symbols are sounds or things which have meaning given to them by their users. Originally, the meaning is arbitrarily assigned. For instance, the English word dog does not in any way physically resemble the animal it stands for. All symbols have a material form, but the meaning cannot be discovered by mere sensory examination of their forms. They are abstractions. A word is one or more sounds that in combination have a specific meaning assigned by a language. The symbolic meaning of words can be so powerful that people are willing to risk their lives for them or take the lives of others. Highly charged emotional words are much more than just a sequence of sounds to us. A major advantage of human language being a learned symbolic communication system is that it is infinitely flexible. Meanings can be changed and new symbols created. This is evidenced by the fact that new words are invented daily and the meaning of old ones change. Language evolves in response to changing historical and social conditions. Some language transformation typically occurs in a generation or less. For instance, the slang words used by our parents are very likely different from those that you use today. You also probably are familiar with many technical terms such as text messaging and high-definition TV that were not in general use even a decade ago. Language and speech are not the same thing. Speech is a broad term simply referring to patterned verbal behavior. In contrast, a language is a set of rules for generating speech. A dialect is a variant of a language. If it is associated with a geographically isolated speech community, it is referred to as a regional dialect. However, if it is spoken by a speech community that is socially isolated, it is a social dialect. These latter dialects are mostly based on class, ethnicity, gender, age, and particular social situations. Black English, or Ebonics in the United States, is an example of a social dialect. Not all societies have distinct dialects. They are far more common in large-scale diverse societies than in small-scale homogeneous ones. Over the last few centuries, deaf people have developed sign languages that are complex visual, gestural forms of communicating with each other. Since they are effective communication systems with standardized rules, they also must be considered languages, even though they are not spoken. Pidgin is a simplified makeshift language that develops to fulfill the communication needs of people who have no languages in common, but who need to occasionally interact for commercial or other reasons. Over the last several centuries, dozens of Pidgin languages developed as Europeans expanded out into the rest of the world for colonization and trade. The most well-known is Pidgin English in New Guinea. However, several forms of Pidgin English and Pidgin French also developed in West Africa and the Caribbean. At times, a Pidgin language becomes the mother tongue of a population. When that happens, it's called a Creole language. As Pidgin changes into Creoles over several generations, their vocabularies enlarge. In the small island nation of Haiti, a French African Pidgin became the Creole language. It is still spoken there by the majority of the population as their principal or only language. It is common for Creole speakers to also speak another standard language as well. In Haiti, for instance, the most educated and affluent people also speak French among themselves. Their Creole language is used on the street. Which language is spoken depends on social situations. The same phenomenon is often found in societies with different dialects of the same language. People may quickly switch back and forth between dialects depending on the person they are talking to at the time. This pattern is referred to as diglossia, or code switching. The African American situational use of Standard and Black English is a primary example. Black English is usually reserved for talking with other African Americans. Typically, the dialect of a society are ranked relative to each other in terms of social status. In the London area of England, the upper class speak public school English, while the lower class often use a Cockney dialect. Because of the stigma against the latter, upwardly mobile Cockneys in business world may take language lessons to acquire the public school speech patterns. Language is more than just a means of communication. It influences our culture and even our thought processes. During the first 4 decades of the 20th century, language was viewed by American linguists and anthropologists as being more important than it actually is in shaping our perception of reality. This was mostly due to Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Whorf, who said that language permeates what we see in the world around us. In other words, language acts like a polarizing lens on a camera in filtering reality. We see the real world only in the categories of our language. Cross-cultural comparisons of such things as color terms were used by Sapir-Whorf as evidence of this hypothesis. When we perceive color with our eyes, we are sensing the portion of electromagnetic radiation that is visible light. In fact, the spectrum of visible light is a continuum of light waves with frequencies that increase at a continuous rate from one end to the other. In other words, there are no distinct colors like red and green in the natural world. Our culture, through language, guides us in seeing the spectrums in terms of the arbitrary established categories that we call colors. Different cultures may divide up the spectrum in different ways. Sapir and Whorf interpreted these data as indicating that color are not objective, naturally determined segments of reality. In other words, the colors we see are predetermined by what our culture prepares us to see. It is now clear that the terminology used by a culture primarily reflects that culture's interests and concerns. For instance, Indians in Canadian Northwest Territory typically have at least 13 terms for different types of conditions of snow, while most non-skiing native Southern Californians use only 2 terms, ice and snow. That does not mean that the English language only has 2 terms. Quite the contrary. There are many more English words that refer to different states of frozen water, such as blizzard, dusting, flurry, frost, hail, hardpack, powder, sleet, slush, and snowflake. The point is that these terms are rarely, if ever, used by people living in tropical or subtropical regions because they rarely encounter frozen water in any other form than ice cubes. The distinction between different snow conditions are not relevant to everyday life, and children may not even have the words to explain them. However, people in these warmer regions make the fine distinction about other phenomena that are important to them. For instance, coastal Southern Californians have many dozens of surfing-related words that would likely be unknown to most Indians in the Northwest Territory or to people living in Britain. Communication is far more than speech and writing. Most of us are unaware that we are communicating in many different ways, even when we are not speaking. The same goes for other social animal species. We are rarely taught about this mostly nonverbal form of human communication at school, even though it is very important for effective interaction with others. Growing up in a society, we informally learn how to use gestures, glances, slight changes in tone of voice, and other auxiliary communication devices to alter or emphasize what we say or do. We learn these highly cultural bound techniques over years, largely by observing others and imitating them.